bigger, much bigger, and I wonder if you have an explanation for that.
I mean, I definitely know that poaching is happening in the MPAs, so if that could be still a factor on their body size, even though they are protected, it may not be enforced enough.
Yeah, I was thinking another explanation might be oyster catchers.
Yeah.
In Southern California, there's a lot more people which fighting the oyster catchers away.
And I definitely saw oyster catchers, not at all of the sites. I think, I don't remember where I saw it, but I saw quite a few at several of the sites. I think in Monterey I saw a bunch. So they could definitely be playing into it.
I wonder, I mean, you looked at so many different NPAs, but whether there was differences among them. Again, the natural bridges is very popular for people.
Yeah, and that was a component that I had thought about adding into my study at the beginning, was looking at the levels of human visitation in addition, but it just got a little big for the time allowed. So I didn't end up incorporating that in, but I think it definitely is something that should be incorporated into future research.
There's been a lot of talk of late about the temperature of the water. And I'm curious if you've seen any studies of how the temperature is affecting the size of the invertebrates on the shorelines. I haven't looked for it.
I've seen only a little bit. I know that they were all cold water species, and so as the water is getting warmer, it's having negative impacts on how well they're able to increase in body size, but I haven't looked into it too thoroughly, but it definitely has an impact. And some of the studies that I looked at that were over larger periods of time, like archaeological studies, they include sea surface temperature in their studies, since they're looking over 10,000 years. But again, that wasn't something I included.
Why do you think there wasn't a difference between before the 50s and the current era?
I think maybe collection is not, because in the study that I was basing my study off of, there were differences between those different time periods. And so I think that in general, collection may not be as much of a factor in this region. I think there's higher pressure in Southern California. So, yeah.
Has there been any change in the way that the museum's specimens, as you look at them, is your sense that people used to collect a lot more for the museums versus currently, or do you think there's a different sampling happening at all?
The most recent museum specimens that I had were like the 1980s, and they're still, the collections are large. They have a lot of stuff, and they also take in, like, not necessarily professional, they're not all scientists' collections. Some of them are just kind of recreational collectors. So they have a lot, and I think that less of that type of collection is happening now. But it's still, I think, a factor. And I think some type of collection does happen for my other species, just not specifically focused on like food or bait, so that it's not as heavily pressured.
And I think you said this, but I can't quite remember. When were the NPAs set up, each of them, roughly?
Most of them were 2007, and then just that northernmost was 2010. But there's variability. Some of these are like the areas around Monterey have been protected for a longer amount of time, but they were officially established as an MPA in that year.
Yeah, and your northern one is the Fitzgerald, which has been protected
Yeah,
forever.
yeah.
So I was going to ask you, Cassie, I was thinking about the Southern California study, and about Laia being so much larger down there. Were there marine protected areas established earlier down there?
The one that they looked at was an old protected area. They only looked at one in that study, and I think that it was established maybe in the 70s. It's older.
So maybe that would have a difference.
And it is a long-lived species, so
especially
it
for the
could be
Laia, because the Laia gigantea can live up to how many years?
30.
30. That little guy. So, maybe because it was protected longer down there, it's had a chance to
Cover.
to get bigger. So maybe they will in the future. Okay, other questions from the audience?
Yes.
I was just curious, there was a question earlier about human impacts on the different MPAs.
Mhm.
You weren't able to incorporate that into your study.
Mhm.
But were you able to discern differences between these species across these different MPAs at all?
There was a lot of, I looked at the like differences between each of the sites as well, and there was a lot of variability between sites, which is why I grouped everything together, just trying to look at, I had thought about pairing my sites, especially since my Monterey sites, I couldn't have non-MPA pairs, I was trying to pair all my northern sites. But there was a lot of variability between sites, and it does seem like at Natural Bridges, where I looked at one site that has pretty high human visitation, and then my second site has pretty low visitation, and it does look like in those lower visitation areas that things can get larger. So even within sites, there can be variability.
I'll leave something for your PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be great to have, the numbers of people as a covariant in
Mhm.
there to see
Mhm.
if that was right.
Yes, and both you and the Roy study found that the non-collected whelks were bigger in the NPAs.
Yeah, for sporata, yeah.
And since they aren't collected, it's
Yeah,
hard to know
it's
how to
A
explain
little,
that.
it creates more questions than it
Yeah.
answers.
Other questions? Well, seeing no questions, the committee will, we will meet up here and we'll talk
And
amongst ourselves.
eat food so that
Eat
we're
little
going to
food,
carry
so what
away.
we do is we can meet out here and determine whether we feel Cassie has presented a defense that will pass muster. And so we'll be right back in, so eat your
How are
food.
you?
You're right back.
Been quite a long line.